Good morning. This is Daniel here from Cop Watch TV. Just want to thank everyone for being part of our live stream today. So just remember, we do want to interact with everyone who's on. So if you have any questions or comments while we're going through it, please definitely leave those so we can read those and interact in real time. We do have several different cases that are really interesting in the police world that we're going to get to. So just kind of a roadmap of where we're going, because we are going to break down the most important issues in policing. So we are going to get to Uvalde. There are some updates in the Uvalde school shooting case that are extremely important and relevant. Also, in Chicago, the Chicago Police Department and the City of Chicago has instituted a foot chase policy that somewhat restricts officers from chasing people on foot. So we're going to talk about that. Then there was a Supreme Court decision that came down yesterday that addressed the concealed carry law in New York and the constitutionality of that. And then lastly, so definitely stick around until the end, because we have a really good and interesting police Nazi story. So, but before we kind of get started with that, again, I want to thank everyone for coming. We have people from Reno, Nevada, and a bunch of other places, North California, Indiana, Oregon. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining our live with us today. So and the first thing that I kind of want to start is last week, we did post on Cop Watch. We asked people to follow my personal channel over on YouTube. It's Police Law News, and I started doing content on TikTok earlier this year, and I got about 100,000 followers, but hadn't really done much on YouTube until I started here with Cop Watch TV. So I was averaging about 100 followers a month, and in the last week that Cop Watch TV asked you guys to follow me, that jumped to a little over 900. So I got 500 one week. I really want to thank everyone who's followed me on there. And same thing on that content, leave comments, let me know what you want. But we also did put in there that if I got to 1,000 followers by this week, that I would tell a story from my career. So I'm not quite at 1,000, but I'm hoping I'll get there soon. So I am going to tell a quick story from earlier in my career as a police officer. And I'm telling this story not because it's the most badass story, but because it's relevant to what police officers do every day. It kind of mixes some of the issues of policing and law and psychology, and just what officers deal with on a regular basis, and just some real information. So I was a rookie officer. It was 2006, 2007. I had less than 2 years on. There was a call and I was working graveyard in not a great area of town. There was a call for service where a 15-year-old kid was home alone in an apartment, and he said that there were people who were banging on his door, that they were knocking on the door, they were harassing him. He said it was a whole group of people, and they kept knocking on the door, yelling at him and running away. So he called for police assistance, and me and my buddy, we were dispatched there. Well, we get there, we check out the area, we don't see any groups of people. We go to the front of the house, the front of the apartment, and we don't see anyone there. So we let dispatch know, hey, tell the caller that, we're outside. If he wants to make contact with us, we're happy to talk to him and address any of his concerns. After dispatch gave us the information back that, okay, yeah, he does want to make contact with you guys, we knocked on the door. We knocked on the door and we said that we were with the police department. When the 15-year-old kid answers the door, he's standing there and he has a gun in his hand. And he's just holding it. And especially as a new police officer, a lot of things go through your head. Some of it is the training where, okay, he's not pointing the gun at me, the gun's at his side, but he's holding it. And you remember back from training that, from someone to be holding a gun at their side to point it and shoot you takes way less than a second. So I start yelling at him to drop the gun, drop the gun. And he's not doing it. He's not dropping the gun. And I just remember thinking, why isn't he dropping the gun? And then your mind goes to things like, well, is he not dropping the gun because he wants to use it against me? If not, why wouldn't he drop it? Long story short, eventually he drops the gun. There was no use of force, and there were no charges or anything like that. But if I had to testify either under oath or write a police report, I would have said that the amount of time that I was yelling at him to drop the gun was somewhere between 8 to 10 seconds. I would have testified to that under oath. I would have bet my life on it. I would have taken a polygraph, and I would have passed it. It's kind of like the George Costanza, it's not a lie if you believe it. And I believed that it was 8 to 10 seconds. Well, at this time with the police department, we didn't have body cameras. We had these belt tape recorders that only record audio. So, later on, me and my buddy went back and we listened to the audio recording. Listening to the audio recording, I was yelling at him for somewhere between 2 to 3 seconds. It was closer to 2 seconds. That was it. So it's important to keep in mind. And so that's what I learned from this, is that when not just police officers, but witnesses, really anybody who's in a stressful situation, the human body does strange things. What you perceive when there's an adrenaline dump isn't always reality. And I just think that's important to know. And I always took that and kind of carried that with me throughout my career. And that's why I think that training such as force science and that whole venue of training and information, I think, is just so important, because police officers are people and they make mistakes, but they're also humans. And the human body, human perception is only so good. So I want to thank everyone for following me and at Police Law News. And okay, enough of that nonsense. Let's get to the stories. So the first one we're going to talk about is Uvalde. So this is the story that, we're pretty much going to cover it every single week, that there is new information, because a lot of people lost their lives. And the point is that a lot of people didn't have to lose their lives. So I've gotten some criticism that, well, you shouldn't Monday morning quarterback. And I don't agree. No, we have to Monday morning quarterback. Everybody has to Monday morning quarterback, because we have to see what happened to figure out how we can have this so it doesn't happen again. That's the goal. So there is no sparing anybody's feelings or not telling people that they did something wrong. No, we have to say exactly what went wrong so we can avoid it in the future. So there was some, public hearings this week where the Department of Public Safety in Texas, Steve McCraw, he gave a lot of statements, and so some information came out. So if you remember, last week I talked about how Slippery Pete Arredondo, he did a phone interview with the Texas Tribune, and he kind of went through his side of things, and I recapped that last week. So, well, this week what we're finding out is that some of the investigators have seen the surveillance video of what happened. So one of the things that Pete Arredondo said is that they couldn't get into the classroom because they didn't have the key. So they didn't have the key, and, again, he made it seem like there was this key ring. He even said how the key ring was 10 pounds and that they were trying different keys. I mean, he made it seem like it was a 90s sitcom of, people trying to get into an apartment and they can't because there's all these different keys. But the surveillance video showed, as testified by people who've actually seen it, that they never even tried the key. They never tried to get in. And in fact, the door was unlocked the entire time. So that's important information to know, that they didn't even try to get in. It also came out that during this, that the officers, they had enough, at least from Steve McCraw, the Texas Department of Public Safety head. He said that within 3 minutes of being on scene, that police officers had enough firepower to engage this shooter. They had rifles and they had ballistic shields. I believe we just showed some pictures of them on the screen. And that within 3 minutes, they could have and should have engaged. Also, what came out is that there were some police officers who were in the school who questioned, why are we waiting so long? Why aren't we going in? And the radio traffic and the testimony that we heard this week is that it was essentially said that the conversation was, well, the incident commander will tell us. The people in charge will tell us. So I think it's important to remember that there is a clear distinction. I'm sure there's blame to go around with everyone who was on scene. Fine. But the majority of the blame has to go to Pete Arredondo. He was the chief of police, and he was first on scene. Whether he believed it at the time or not, he was the incident commander. He's in charge. And there has to be a distinction between the regular rank-and-file police officers who were there in the hallway and the leaders in charge. And here's what I want people to think about. If you are one of 8, 10, 12, 19 officers in a hallway, and you are waiting to go and do something, well, you are the training and the best practices are that individual officers don't take independent action, that you wait for your leaders to tell you what to do. And there's a really good reason for that. If you're in a hallway at the school and you're waiting for directions, you don't know if there's another team of 10 or 20, 30 officers who are waiting outside the school, who are waiting to bust in the window, or if there's another group of 8 officers who are on the other side who are about to do something tactically. So taking independent action as an officer in a situation like that is frowned upon, more than frowned upon. That isn't how officers are trained at all, and they really shouldn't be. But that also means that leadership has to be competent and has to be strategic in what they do. So I just want to make that distinction between that the majority of the blame has to go with Pete Arredondo and the incident commander on scene. And sure, there's some blame for everyone who was there, but I just wanted to let you know from the perspective of the rank and file of what they might be thinking is that it's not their job to communicate with the 4 or 5 other law enforcement agencies who were on scene. And there are good tactical reasons why individual officers aren't making independent decisions and independent action. Now, they were there for 77 minutes. Obviously, that's extreme. Okay, so what I'm talking about is you're there and you hear the shooting, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and that's probably when they started to question things. So no, of course, they shouldn't have gone 77 minutes before there's independent action, but at least the initial thought of we have people who are in charge, who are managing this whole thing, who have more information than us. Relying on that is a reasonable thing to do, at least at the beginning. And there's also something disturbing is that there was an off-duty Uvalde Public Schools police officer. His name is, I have it here, Ruben Ruiz. And his wife is a teacher at the school. His wife was a teacher at the school. And he was off duty, and she had called him that, she had been shot. And he went to the school, and he tried to enter the school. And it's such a heartbreaking story because, as a husband and as a parent, I can't even imagine what this guy went through. But as he tried to enter the school, he was stopped from the other police officers, and his gun was taken from him, and he wasn't allowed to help his wife in a situation where he knows that she had been shot. And I believe that there were other phone calls to 911 from her and from students in the classroom that at least for a while she was still alive in there. And that is just unbelievably heartbreaking. We do have a comment. Isaac Nicholas said, single officer actor shooter response is the best practice. Yeah, so I think what you're referring to is what some of the best practices are, especially after Columbine, and that was before I was ever a police officer, is that, so the only training I've ever known is that when there is an active shooter, if you are a police officer, you get there and you go in. Even if you're outgunned, even if you're outmanned, if the bad guy is shooting at you, he's not shooting at innocent victims. That is the training. And if you aren't willing to do that, then you shouldn't be a police officer. And that is the training, and that is the thought process of most law enforcement officers around the country. And we know this is the case because there are no police officers who are defending what happened there in Uvalde. So a lot of times when there's a controversial issue, you'll have police officers or unions or police chiefs or other people who are lack of a better term, pro-police, who defend actions of police. No one is defending. No one is defending this. The last thing on Uvalde is, so as we know, we've reported on this before, is that Pete Arredondo won a city councilor seat. So approximately 2 weeks before the school shooting, Pete Arredondo, he won a city council seat in Uvalde, Texas. He's actually pretty popular. He won with over 70% of the vote. So, he was sworn in a week after the shooting in a secret ceremony. I say secret ceremony because these are typically public. It actually closes to the public because I think they knew what was going to happen if they opened it to the public. So he was sworn in as a city councilor. So a lot of people have been saying, well, is there a way to get him out? He should be able to. One thing on that, one little side note. So the Uvalde Public School District manager did place Pete Arredondo on administrative leave this week. I think it was Wednesday or Thursday of this week. He was placed on leave. So he is officially on leave from the police department job, but he's still an elected member of the city council. So is there any remedy to that? And there was a news story yesterday where, so there is something in the city ordinance in Uvalde that essentially says that if a city councilor misses 3 city council meetings, that the other councilors have the option to vote to basically get the individual off the city council because they've abandoned their position. Well, he's missed 2 meetings. He hasn't gone to the last 2 meetings because they're public. And people, again, we know what the result is going to be if he shows up in public. So earlier this week, he requested a leave of absence from the city council. So it's something that the other elected members would have to approve. He requested this leave of absence, essentially to excuse him from attending meetings, and they unanimously voted against that. So the 3rd meeting will be coming up here pretty soon. If Pete Arredondo doesn't show up to that 3rd meeting, then the other city councilors should be able to vote him out even though it is an elected office that he won. So we will keep our eyes on that, and hopefully that is the case. So that's what we have on Uvalde. So if anybody has any questions or comments that you saw this week that the DPS head Steve McCraw that he was talking about that I didn't get to, definitely like to interact and answer any questions or comments that anybody might have on that. Let's see what we got. So let's see, we don't see anything in the comments right now. So I know we cover this case, but I think it's just such an important case to talk about because we don't want this to happen again. So we need to know exactly what happened to avoid this in the future. So like I said, we will keep updated on the Uvalde school shooting. So Ravens and Rife, Ravens and Flies says, how about just stand aside when armed parents come to save their children, not arresting them? Okay, so that's a really good point. I actually was going to address that, and I didn't get to it. So that's a really good point. So we have to think about a couple things. So the officers, so we have police, imagine this, there's an active, whether it's at a school or at a grocery store, you have an active shooter or something bad happening inside of a place, inside of a school. And you are assigned as a police officer to the perimeter of that. So that's your job. Your job is to make sure that no one gets in or out. And you know that there are 5, 10, 20, 30 police officers inside the school that are dealing with the emergency that happens. So if you're outside the school, you know that there's police officers inside the school. You probably don't know what they're doing, but it's reasonable to think they're handling this. So if that's what you would think as a police officer, again, which is reasonable, having armed people go in as well, whether it's parents, whether it's family, friends, whether it's random people who are just walking by, the idea of letting in other random people into a situation where 20 armed police officers are there dealing with it seems like a bad idea, would be against all protocol, would be against policy. Now, of course, looking at this with 2020 hindsight, yes, I think everyone, even the officers who were on perimeter, would probably say, well, yeah, if we knew that these officers who were inside were just standing there for over an hour, yeah, not only would they have probably let the parents go in, but they would have gone in from the perimeter. So obviously there were a lot of communication problems, and with 2020 hindsight, I think it's easy to say things like they should have let the armed parents in, but when you're in the moment and as a perimeter officer, when there's 20 cops in there dealing with a madman, the idea of letting in other armed people, that just isn't a good idea. So I think that's a really good question. A lot of people had brought that up, and like I said, 2020 hindsight, well, yes, of course. Not only should the parents have been allowed in, but all the perimeter officers should have been able to go in too. But, they didn't have that luxury at the time. As an officer working on the perimeter of a scene, how would you know that this is what was going to happen inside? Let's see. Upstate Audits USA says, question, why is every citizen's first thought when a cop gets behind them not even... Okay, hang on. Question. What is every citizen's first thought when a cop gets behind them, not even pulling them over? I don't know. I don't know what anyone's thought would be, but if you have an answer, please put it in there. And if it's interesting, we will absolutely address it. So I hope I addressed that question about, why the parents weren't allowed in. Is it a bad look to, tase or pepper spray? Of course. But as an officer working on the perimeter, they have to protect that perimeter. Just as one last thing on this, imagine what the perimeter officer would be thinking. If I let this armed person in, then we have police officers who are watching a door or watching a hallway or who knows what they're doing inside. Armed people coming in behind them, are they going to know? Is it parents? Is it bad guys? Is it this guy's friends? Are they trying to help the bad guy? So there's and especially because there's different police departments on different radio frequencies. So I think we can reasonably understand why they didn't let that happen in the moment. Okay. All right. So let's see. So the next case I want to talk about is, so Chicago police had a foot chase policy that just went into effect. And I think this was covered on the Buck and Deck show, and Ben Shapiro talked about it. So it's kind of Fox News, CNN. It's pretty much been all over the news the last 4 or 5 days. And essentially what the narrative is that Chicago's a violent city. And now they have rules saying that police officers can't chase people on foot. Well, that's kind of true, but kind of not true. So I just want to break it down just a little bit of what this foot chase policy actually means. So Chicago is a violent city. I grew up in Chicago. I lived there till I was 22 years old. It's a great city. I love it. Go Bears. But in 2021, Chicago had 797 murders. It is an unbelievably violent city. So far this year, they are at 294 murders. So they're on pace for somewhere between 600 to 700 murders. So probably about 150 less than last year. But Chicago is still one of the most violent cities in the country. So the idea of inhibiting or hampering police officers from enforcing the law seems like a bad idea, and at least a lot of the news stories that I read, that's kind of the direction that they were going. But so here's what this foot chase policy does. It says a couple things. First, it talks about, if you don't have probable cause or reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed, that police officers can't just chase people. Well, police officers should be doing that anyways. Just because someone runs, if there's nothing else to go on, running isn't a crime. Photography's not a crime, and just running isn't a crime either. So if a police officer rolls up and everybody runs in 5 directions with no other reasonable suspicion or probable cause for a crime, police officers can't chase those individuals. So that's a good idea. That's a good policy. That is already in place under Fourth Amendment and Supreme Court cases anyways, that, police officers have to have reasonable suspicion that they can articulate in order to detain someone. But what this policy says is that police officers can engage in a foot chase if it's a felony or if it's a Class 1 misdemeanor. So felony is obviously any crime that's punishable by more than a year. So anything serious, cops can absolutely get in a foot chase for. Class A felony, or Class A misdemeanors, in Chicago, that would include aggravated assault, that would include domestic violence, that would include things like that. So still more serious misdemeanor crimes, police can still engage in a foot chase on those individuals. What is restricted under this foot chase policy is Class B misdemeanors in Chicago. And the city of Chicago gave some examples of what those are. So they basically, one more thing. So also what police officers can change for are traffic violations that are dangerous in nature. And what does that mean? The examples they gave are DWI and reckless driving. So if you have a reckless driver or a drunk driver and they get out and run, police officers in Chicago can still chase for that. So here's what they can't chase for. Here's the examples that they gave. Littering, jaywalking, business infractions. I don't know what that would be. Operating a business without a license, like selling flowers at a park or something without a license. I don't know. That's the example that they gave. Panhandling, so things like that. And also less serious traffic crimes, like expired registration, expired license plates, careless driving. So the foot chase policy basically restricts, only the Class B misdemeanors. So Class B misdemeanor. So it really isn't as big of a deal. It really isn't as big of a deal as a lot of people are making it. Chicago Police, part of the policy, also said that they, if an officer loses radio communication, or he doesn't know where they are. Well, that's just a basic safety issue, that if you're on a foot chase with someone and you lose your radio or you don't know where you are, you shouldn't be chasing someone anyway. So some of the things that they have in the policy are just kind of common sense that should have been there anyways. So there's been a big deal about this foot chase policy in Chicago, but when I actually looked into it to try to break it down, it doesn't seem like it's that unreasonable. It doesn't seem like it's going to handcuff police a whole lot. So let's see if we have any questions. So Eric J. John said, any reasonable suspicion of a crime should be reasonable enough. Yeah, and it typically is. So any reasonable suspicion of a crime. So when we talk about that, is that at least when it comes to foot chases in Chicago, now just because an officer can't chase the person on foot doesn't mean that they can't set up a perimeter. Going on the radio and say we have someone running on this street and setting up officers to set up a perimeter. So just because it's a lower misdemeanor crime, if there's reasonable suspicion, officers, like I said, they can still call out the direction it's going. They can still they can still call out the direction it's going. They try to set up perimeter. So they can still try to do things. Also, especially if it's someone in a car, they vary just by the license plate of the car, as long as it's not stolen. A lot of times you can figure out who was in the car to try to issue a criminal summons and get them into court later on. Let's see. Okay, MCW Joker says, that was a good question. If photography isn't a crime, then why do real cop watchers get arrested for being on a sidewalk? So that is a really good question. So I guess for that, I would ask you to cite for a specific example, because I watch these auditor channels too. I'm going to shout out Long Island Audits and the Amagansett Press. Those are the two I watch all the time. And, I've never seen, I've seen Long Island Audit. I've seen him be arrested, but not just for standing on a sidewalk and filming. So the arrest that he had, I think it was I don't want to say the city, but it was recent. So that isn't, I haven't seen that. In Arizona, in the Arizona State Senate, recently they tried to pass a law that basically said that you couldn't film within a certain footage, a certain amount of feet of a police officer. And I mean so there are states that have tried to pass these laws, but they typically don't stand up. So photography isn't a crime. You cannot be arrested for filming in public. What I've seen people get arrested for is interfering. So if there's a crime scene and people are arrested for interfering with a police investigation, not just for photography. Obviously, if someone is arrested just for filming or for taking pictures, that is not a lawful arrest. There's likely going to be a civil suit in a case like that, and there should be, because police officers should not be arresting people just for photography. Let's see if we have any other questions on that. Yeah, so 81 Vet said they usually get arrested for interference. Yes, that's exactly what I was saying. So that's typically what it is. So usually almost every municipality, city ordinance, state statute has something where you can't interfere with with police officers during an investigation. So you can't interfere, but filming is fine. So, well, I know that everyone's going to take this to this kind of gray line in the middle. Okay, well, can you film from 20 feet away? Well, that seems reasonable. Can you film from 2 feet away? Well, probably not. Well, what if you're in the middle? What if you're at 10 feet? So I think that's where a lot of this kind of gets, because, if a police officer, especially if they're arresting someone, I think it's reasonable that that police officer should be able to work and conduct their business, safely, but also every individual has the right to take photographs in public, and it's important to protect that right. So there has to be a striking of a balance. And yeah, usually it's with interference is typically the line that where people get arrested for. So MCW Joker said, watch DirectD in Mesa, Arizona. Okay, I haven't checked that out. All right, Truth Is I Know It says, why is America's criminal justice budget the third highest military budget in the world, yet does little make an impact on crime? Well, I would disagree with you there on that. So I think we have to think of a situation of, we are spending a lot of, so I think what you're saying, and you absolutely correct me if I'm wrong, because I want to make sure that I'm addressing the exact thing that someone's saying. I'm not trying to misquote anyone or put up a straw man argument, but I think what you're saying is that the budget for police departments in the United States is incredibly large, and despite that, we have a lot of high crime. So I think that's kind of what you're saying, and I think that is a reasonable thing to say. Now, we have tried defunding the police and cutting police budgets. They actually tried it in a whole bunch of cities. After 2020, they tried it in Minneapolis, Seattle, Portland. New York cut $1 billion from the police department budget, and San Francisco. And San Francisco is where I'm going to go to, because that's, typically, so the laboratory of ideas, especially like, more left-wing liberal ideas, funding the police, those, a lot of times they start in California and a lot of times in San Francisco. So San Francisco did this, had the whole defunding the police thing. They have a very progressive prosecutor, and they basically tried all these ideas. Well, what was the result of that? I think there were 12, either Walgreens or CVS, that closed because police officers were not arresting people for shoplifting under like $950. So gangs of people and individuals were just going into these stores and stealing stuff. So, what it was either Walgreens or CVS, basically shut down in San Francisco. The mayor of San Francisco, whose name I can't remember right now, but about 3 or 4 months ago, she went on the news and she said that this has to end. So the mayor, the Democrat mayor of the most liberal city, went on the news, did a press conference, and talked about how crime was out of control, and that they're going to get back to taking people to jail. So the idea of, now, could funds be used better? Could they be more efficient? Well, absolutely. But the idea of, well, we're just going to cut funding from police and that's going to make things better, all the research and data have is that it says that it makes things worse, that communities get more violent. So that would be my answer to that. Yeah, okay, so the mayor is London Breed. She's been the mayor since 2018. And it was about 3 or 4 months ago where she gave a pretty scathing statement on some of these very progressive policies that, at least in her opinion, have ruined the city of San Francisco, and that she wants to get back to law and order. So that was just a couple months ago. Okay, so also there was a case. Let's see if we have any other comments on that. The truth is, we know it says those Walgreens were going to close anyways. You're lying. Yes, Walgreens. Yes. Yeah, Walgreens are closing all around the nation. No one likes convenience stores. Has nothing to do with the crime, even though that's what Walgreens themselves says. Okay, brilliant. So we have the Heller case from. Okay, so one of the other cases that came out yesterday is that I think is really interesting is the concealed carry law in New York City. So just to kind of go back a little bit, so in a lot of cities, so I grew up in Chicago, and growing up in Chicago, handguns were illegal. You couldn't have a handgun in the city of Chicago. Washington, D.C. was like that, and so was New York City. So in 2008, there was the Heller case where basically there was a challenge to the rights to carry or have a gun in Washington, D.C., and the Supreme Court essentially said that no, that individuals can bear arms in other situations other than being a part of a state militia. So that was a Heller case in 2008, which basically made the Washington, D.C. law that made it so you couldn't own a handgun in the District of D.C., basically made that unconstitutional. Chicago, then a lot of the other cities who had these laws kind of fell in line and amended. Chicago wasn't one of those cities that did that. So there was the McDonald case in 2010 that was also decided 5-4 by the Supreme Court, which basically struck down the law in Chicago. So, now it's pretty much, we now know that cities that you cannot restrict people from owning a handgun in the city, obviously with reasonable restrictions like, people are felons or you have to be 21 years old. But besides that cities can't have these blanket bans on handguns. But what some cities and a lot of places have are bans on concealed carry. So not only do you have to apply to get concealed carry, but New York City had this law where just applying, showing that you're not a criminal, not a felon, that you're 21 years old, that you're not mentally defective, that not only did New York City require that, which is probably fine, at least under the Constitution, not only requiring that, but also you had to show a special need. Think about that, a special need to show that you needed a handgun. A special need is what it said. So that was challenged, and the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 yesterday that essentially said no. No, I mean, so the way that it was in practice in New York City, if you were rich and connected or a celebrity, you were able to get a handgun. The regular people weren't. So the Supreme Court came out yesterday and ruled 6-3 that is an unconstitutional requirement. So, concealed carry, you can still have permits for concealed carry, but you cannot have this unreasonable restriction of having a special need to be protected. So I think that was interesting. That's what came out. That's what came out yesterday. The governor of New York, then Kathy, I believe her name is Holcomb. I can't remember her last name. It's like HOL something. But so she came out yesterday and she was lieutenant governor, and then after Cuomo stepped down, she basically took his spot as the governor for the end of his term. So she came out yesterday and she said how this is wrong, how this is going to make everybody unsafe, and she said that she's willing, and her quote is that, "I'm willing to go back to muskets." Okay. Well, I think a lot of us, think, well, if you're willing to go back to muskets, then you, the people who protect you and your family and your friends and other politicians, if you honestly believe that, lead by example. Go back to muskets. Otherwise, I don't think it's reasonable or a good idea to tell other people what they should do with their own safety if you're not willing to do it yourself. Let's see. Do we have any comments? Anybody have any thoughts about some of these concealed carry laws or some of these other things? Let's see. Ego 10 said a well-armed society is a polite society. Yeah, that's kind of an old cliche, I guess, but I think it's a reasonable thing. And if we look at actual data, so Chicago, New York, Washington D.C., these places that have had the most strict gun laws also have the highest gun violence. So I know this is surprising, but it's almost like the people who violate our murder laws aren't following our gun registration laws. I know that seems strange, but it almost seems like that's what's happening. Let's see. Eric J. John said Ohio just passed constitutional concealed carry. Great. Good things happening in the Midwest. MD said judges also need to be held accountable. Yeah, I think that's true. Judges do need to be held accountable. It's really difficult to hold judges accountable because they have qualified immunity. Vigilant Voice said musket speed loaders on sale now. Nice comment. Very, very good. Very good. Let's see. Talina Taylor said, how do you feel about Texas allowing open carrying with a permit? So how do I feel about that? I'm not crazy about that, but I would have to know. I don't know if that's something that Texas is proposing, but I wouldn't be in favor of something like that. So when it comes to a lot of these gun laws, and there was just an agreement from both Republicans and Democrats that there are going to be some what they call as like reasonable restrictions and considerations on gun legislation going forward. And one of the things that I think is interesting is red flag laws. So I didn't have this on my list of things to talk about, but red flag laws are some of the things that the Republicans have conceded on a little bit, and it's going to make it easier for states to put those out there. So I've got opinions on red flag laws. I think it's one of those things that on its face, it sounds good, but unless there are specific provisions in line, I think it's really hard to implement. And I think it's very easy to see how this can go off the rails and could end up not being a good idea. Okay, so MD said, right, and why can't people film in a courtroom? Isn't that the very niche definition of secret courts? So that's more of a local thing. So you can film in some courtrooms. Obviously, the Johnny Depp trial was recorded. The Kyle Rittenhouse case was recorded. So was Derek Chauvin. So I think a lot of it is local, and it has to be approved by the judge, and stuff like that. So Mark Garagos, the attorney who does the Reasonable Doubt show with Adam Carolla, which is a great legal show. It's on 3 days a week or so. So Mark Garagos represented Scott Peterson in that case, and he often talks about that Mark Garagos as the attorney for Scott Peterson was convicted of murder on basically a lot of circumstantial evidence. Anyways, if you listen to Mark Garagos, he said that his biggest mistake, and he publicly says that his biggest mistake as an attorney was not allowing cameras in the courtrooms, that the prosecution wanted everything to be on camera and he didn't. He felt that if it became even more of a media circus, that would hurt his client, Scott Peterson. And he looks back on it now and he says that was 100% the wrong decision to make. He said because only some of the information was getting out to the public, so the talking heads like Nancy Grace on CNN and all those different places were only getting some of the information. And he said that if he had to do it again, he would want all of it to be public and televised so people would actually know what happened and not just hearing people's opinions about it. So, but that is pretty much a local jurisdictional thing when it comes to cameras in courtrooms. Some allow, some don't. All right, let's see. MCW Joker again says upstairs answer that's saying it's videoing is interfering. Yeah, so I mean, again, just taking video is not interfering. Obviously, you can't be 6 inches behind a police officer while they're trying to work. But if you're at a reasonable distance, most time that you are going to be okay and not be arrested, which is correct because that is an important constitutional right that we all have and should be able to enjoy. Let's see. So one of the last cases one of the things I'm going to talk about is it's this case out of Kent, Washington. So, one more thing. Eric J. John said, violent crimes have dropped significantly since Ohio passed concealed carry in 2004. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So really quick. So one quick story. When I was doing my undergrad at Western Illinois, and I don't know if this is true or not, I've got no way to verify it, but one of our instructors, before he was a professor at my school, he was working with the Florida State Police, and he talks about, we'll get to that case in a second, but he talks about how that, Florida back in the early 2000s had a really huge problem with carjackings, people being carjacked on these highways. Well, they passed some law in Florida which basically said that, if you, some of the effect of, some extra protection that if you, use force, deadly force against someone who's trying to carjack you, that, you're not going to be prosecuted. And he would talk about how carjacking is decreased an unbelievable amount. Don't know if that's true, but that's kind of in line with your statement. Okay, back to the story I was going to talk about before I got sidetracked. So in Kent, Washington is a suburb of Seattle. There's an assistant police chief named Derek Camerzell. At the time of this incident, he had 27 years on. Well, what he thought was a brilliant idea to do is he took Nazi insignia and he put it on his office door. I'm not kidding. The assistant police chief. Well, obviously and reasonably, people complained. They were annoyed, they were irritated, and they were disturbed. So they filed a complaint. There was an official investigation by the city of Kent, Washington, and they found that, that he actually did do these things. He put it up. He wasn't set up. He even admitted to putting it up. But what he said is that he was confused. He didn't know what these meant. He didn't understand the context. They didn't really believe him, so they punished him. They gave him 2 weeks off without pay. So he got the suspension. He served the suspension. He came back to work. Well, then members of the community got wind of what happened after the suspension was disturbed. And you can imagine what any community would think about this. A reasonable community members would say, 2 weeks isn't enough, this guy needs to be fired. And there was a pretty big uprising about this, in Kent, Washington, and people were reasonably upset. So what the city of Kent decided to do, and this is where they had some very, very predictable legal problems, is they went ahead and they fired him then. So, and then he sued to get his job back. So a couple things on this, just a little bit on how public safety, and I know people are going to have different opinions about this, so definitely put your questions in the comments about public safety and public sector unions and employment. So the way that public sector employment works is, whether there's unions or not, that a police department, a city, the administration, they can discipline, suspend, terminate employees for violation of the department policy, but they can only do it once. You have to get it right the first time. And from a big perspective, from a big overview of running a police department, that's a good idea. That's a good thing. Because you have to imagine a situation, let's say that you're a police officer, and let's say that you're rude to someone on a call for service. Let's say you even curse at them. They complain, there's an investigation, it's on body camera, which is why body cameras are fantastic. Everyone should have body cameras. And let's say they give the officer 10 hours off. They give the officer a day off. The officer serves his day off. Well, let's say there's a new chief or a new mayor, 6 days, 6 months, or 6 years later, and they don't like that officer. There's no way for them to reopen that and be like, you know what, 8.5 years ago, you swore you got a day off. No, we actually wanted to fire you for that. Can't do that, which is good, because you don't want, I'm saying police and public sector because, that's what we're talking about. But think of any employment thing. So once you're disciplined, it shouldn't hang over your head forever. I mean, the morale that would do to any work environment just isn't reasonable. So the idea of you get one shot at it, discipline the person, and it's over. That's it. It's like double jeopardy. You can't get him twice. So this guy Camerzell, he sued because he was disciplined twice. So on a moral level, he is wrong on every moral level that we can think about. But he's right legally. So he sued. He wanted over $3 million. And the city of Kent, Washington came to an agreement with him. They didn't take it to trial, because they knew they were going to lose. Not on moral grounds, but on legal grounds. They knew they were going to lose. So to save the taxpayers, who really are the victim in all of this, because had they just fired this guy, they would have been okay. They would have been fine. They probably would have been, no matter what arbitration hearing officer or anything that he would have challenged, they would have been within their rights to fire him for what he did. So them not getting it right the first time, and they did get it wrong, That's what caused this legal problems. So, okay, so they settled the lawsuit for $1.52 million. In exchange, he had to retire. So he still gets his retirement. So being 27 years on the police department, I don't know what their retirement system is. You gotta think it's at least 6 figures. So he gets his retirement plus a nice retirement gift of $1.52 million. All because, in my opinion, not just because of his actions, he should have been fired for his actions, but because the city administration did not do things properly initially and then disciplined him twice, which you can't do. So, if we have any questions, I know that when it comes to qualified immunity, let's see. Oh, okay, so Talina Taylor says, City of Kent should have been proactive and not reacting to public concerns, have an unbiased investigation to begin with. So, on that, so I think the investigation was unbiased. What I mean by that is they found that he did it. They found that he violated policy. So the investigation itself seemed unbiased. Now, maybe what wasn't unbiased was the discipline that he received. If you're an assistant police chief, that's a pretty high rank, and he had been there for 27 years. And I honestly don't know his history before that. My guess is it was probably a good history if you're there for 27 years. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But yeah, so the bias part would be in whoever imposed the discipline. It seems like the investigation found exactly what it should have. This was the complaint. We interviewed him. He admitted it, and we found that he did it. That was a violation of policy. I think investigation's okay, but the imposing of the discipline, that's the issue. And yeah, MCW Joker, which that money comes from taxpayers. That's exactly it. So the taxpayers are the ones who are punished for not just bad actions of the assistant police chief, but they are punished because of the city not doing things correctly. Okay, so like I said, I know that people have information. So I came in late. What the hell is he trying to? Okay, I don't know what that is. Okay, so I know that people have issues with police unions and qualified immunity, and I think that topic is really interesting. So if you do have any questions about that, make sure that you put it in the chat. And while you are doing that, just make sure that, you like and follow this channel. We do these live events every week. So every Friday at 2 p.m. Mountain Time. So, in order to be in the chat so we can interact and I can read your comments so we can go back and forth, definitely make sure that you like and subscribe to this channel so you know exactly when that we are going to do things. One of the last things that I want to talk about is, so there's this video, I believe it was in Virginia, of a police officer versus an excavator. It's a pretty crazy video, and I've never seen anything like this before. So, it was Vermont. I get all those East Coast states mixed up. It was Vermont. So here's the video. Check it out. It's coming, and you're going to like it. So we have a police officer who's trying to arrest someone for a crime, and the family member is in the excavator of the person that they're trying to arrest. I don't even know what the appropriate use of force is on an excavator. That's not in the force continuum. Yeah, I guess you can call it transformer for backup. But yeah, Dr. Lewinsky at Force Science, he doesn't address this, but I think he should do a whole model on it, a whole module on this. And we do have the full video of this up over at Copwatch TV. I believe it was posted earlier today. So if you want to watch the full video, unedited, definitely go ahead and watch it over there at Copwatch TV. It is an extremely interesting video to watch. And all right, so those were the stories that we kind of wanted to get through. Oh my God, this is awesome. Yeah, that's a crazy video. Send in the canine officer. Yeah, I guess they could. I don't know what I don't know what the other options are. So I guess police departments will be waiting for their excavator force training. Yeah, so definitely go ahead and check out the full video over on Cop Watch TV, and we have it up there. So, and definitely leave comments in there. If the link is in the link is in the chat, and you just go to the page. But and again, on that video, any interesting comments or questions about it, definitely put them in there. And, maybe we could address them. We could address them next week. And yeah, so I just want to thank everyone for participating in the live stream that we had. It's always fun to interact and see what people are thinking about some of the most interesting issues in policing and breaking them down and seeing in real time how our audience feels about them. So definitely make sure that you go ahead and follow, like, and subscribe me at Police Law News, and also Cop Watch TV, just so you know exactly when we're going to do these lives. And every week we put up several videos of raw, unedited police videos. So I hope that everyone has a safe weekend, and thanks for watching.